I dedicated nearly a decade of my life to my parents' business. Every late night, every missed holiday, every ounce of my energy went into building something I thought was ours. I was the first to arrive in the mornings, the last to leave at night, and I often worked weekends without complaint. I answered every call, fixed every mistake, and handled problems that no one else wanted to touch. My parents always told me I was doing a great job, and for years, I believed them. I believed that loyalty, hard work, and sacrifice mattered. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. A few days before my 29th birthday, my mother called me into the office. I felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. Maybe they had some surprise, maybe a bonus, maybe a recognition for all the years I had poured into the company. I walked in, smiling, only to be met with expressions I didn't recognize. Pride mixed with hesitation. My chest tightened. "Kat," my mother began, carefully choosing her words. "We've decided to make some changes in the business. For the sake of cutting costs, we're letting you go." The words echoed in my head. I stared at her blankly, struggling to process what she just said. Letting me go? Me, the person who had practically run the place for years? My brother, who came in whenever he felt like it, spent hours playing video games during work, and often left tasks unfinished, was staying. No warning, no discussion, no chance to fix anything, just fired. I tried to speak, to argue, to make them see reason, but they were firm. "It's business," my father said, with that same calm, final tone I had heard so many times before. "You know how it is." I left that office in a daze, my hands shaking. I felt like the rug had been ripped from under me. I had been betrayed by the people I trusted most. The person who had poured their soul into our family business was now unemployed, while my lazy sibling remained untouched. The next few weeks were brutal. Every reminder of the business, every email, every client call, every project I had once managed, felt like a dagger twisting in my chest. I couldn't stop thinking about how I had built this empire from the ground up. Without me, how could it survive? My mind raced, torn between anger, sadness, and disbelief. People outside the family didn't understand. Friends and colleagues tried to console me, but no one could. They hadn't seen the countless nights I spent working, the holidays I sacrificed, the personal dreams I postponed for the business. They hadn't seen the pride in my parents' eyes when we hit milestones, until suddenly, that pride turned into dismissal. I realized I was no longer valued, no longer seen as the backbone of the company. I was expendable. That betrayal left a scar. It changed me in ways I didn't yet understand. And little did I know the story was far from over. Because the business my parents thought they could run without me was about to face challenges they weren't prepared for, and I would eventually hold the power to decide its fate. The days after I was fired blurred together in a haze of disbelief, anger, and quiet resentment. I walked around the town I had grown up in, seeing the familiar streets, the small businesses I had supported with my family, and the faces of people who had once respected me professionally. Now, they looked at me with a kind of pity I couldn't accept. I wasn't looking for sympathy, I was looking for justice or, at the very least, recognition. First, I tried to find another job. I sent resumes, attended interviews, and networked tirelessly. But something had changed. Every time I spoke about my experience, my dedication, my results, it sounded like bragging to strangers, and they didn't see what I knew. They didn't see the sacrifices, the late nights, the problems I had solved that no one else could. And yet, in my parents' eyes, all that mattered was cost-cutting and keeping my brother comfortable. I remember one evening sitting alone at a coffee shop, staring at my laptop and realizing the truth. I had no control over my life, or at least I thought I didn't. My parents had made their decision, and I had been powerless to stop it. But that moment, as bitter as it was, sparked something inside me. If I wanted control, I would have to take it myself. No one was going to hand it to me. Meanwhile, the business itself began to show cracks almost immediately. I kept in touch with a few loyal employees, people I had mentored and trusted. They whispered about missed deadlines, confused clients, and decisions that lacked strategic thinking. My brother, now in a leadership role he hadn't earned, was struggling to maintain even the basics. I wasn't in the business anymore, but it hurt to watch from the sidelines. It was like watching a car I had built crash in slow motion, with my parents at the wheel. But instead of feeling helpless, I started plotting. Not revenge at first, not yet. First, I needed to rebuild myself. I started my own small consulting business, leveraging the skills, experience, and knowledge I had honed over years. Slowly, it grew. Clients came, impressed by my ability to fix problems and streamline operations. I was finally seeing what my work was truly worth, outside the shadow of my family's name. The irony wasn't lost on me. The business I had been fired from, the empire I had helped construct, was beginning to falter without me. And I realized something terrifying, but also exhilarating. I had the power to influence its fate. I could step in and save it, becoming the hero my parents never appreciated. Or I could let it crumble, perhaps letting a competitor, one I had connections with now, take over. Every night, I lay awake wrestling with the question. Was it fair to let them fail after everything? Could I forgive the betrayal, or was this finally my chance to reclaim control? Not for them, but for myself. The lines between revenge and justice blurred. I knew one thing for certain. The next move would define not just the business, but the family and possibly my own future. Months passed, and my consulting business started to flourish. I was gaining clients, credibility, and, most importantly, confidence. Every success reminded me of what I was capable of when I was in control. But even as I built my own path, my parents' business continued to falter. Small mistakes snowballed into major problems. Revenue slipped, key clients complained, and employees who had once admired my leadership quietly questioned the new management. One afternoon, I got a call from an old client, someone who had known both me and my parents' company for years. "Kat," they said hesitantly, "I don't know if you've heard, but things are getting messy over there. They might not survive the next quarter." My heart skipped a beat. A part of me wanted to jump in immediately, to swoop in and save the business I had once nurtured. But another part, the part still smarting from betrayal, felt the thrill of watching them struggle. I hadn't just been replaced, I had been discarded. And now fate was offering me a taste of power. I started paying closer attention. I checked public records, followed news mentions, and even discreetly spoke to a few employees I trusted. The picture was clear. Without me, the business was vulnerable. Clients were leaving. Internal conflicts were growing. My brother, while charming and confident on the surface, was failing to make decisions that actually mattered. Then came the tipping point. One of the largest clients, one I had personally landed years ago, called to express concern about the company's stability. "Kat, if there's any way you could advise them, or even help stabilize things, I think it might save the contract," they said. Their voice carried hope, but also hesitation. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. On one hand, I could step in, fix everything, and be hailed as a hero. On the other hand, I could let them stumble, let the competitor I had been speaking with quietly gain influence. My consulting work had brought me into contact with other companies in the same industry. One of them, in fact, had been scouting for opportunities to acquire struggling competitors. And now, my parents' company was sitting right in their crosshairs. Every scenario ran through my mind. Save them and be the generous, forgiving daughter, or let the chips fall where they may and assert my position in the industry. The thought of revenge was intoxicating, but I also knew that whichever path I chose would leave scars. On them, on me, and on the family I had once cherished. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the city lights. I thought about my parents' words during that meeting years ago, the way they had dismissed me like I was disposable. And I felt a strange calm settle over me. I wasn't powerless anymore. I wasn't someone to be brushed aside. For the first time in years, I realized the game had changed. And soon they would learn it the hard way. A few weeks later, the inevitable happened. One evening, I received an unexpected call from a senior executive at one of the industry's leading competitor firms, a company I had built professional relationships with over the years. They were aware of my expertise, my track record, and, crucially, the troubles brewing at my parents' company. Kat, the executive said, their tone cautious but deliberate. We've been watching the situation unfold at your parents' business. If you're interested, there's an opportunity to step in with us. We could use someone like you, someone who knows the industry, knows the company, and can make real change. My heart raced. Here it was, the door I had been waiting for. But it wasn't just a job offer. It was leverage, a chance to gain influence over the company that had discarded me, and maybe, just maybe, turn the tables completely. I could join the competitor, help them grow, and quietly, strategically, control the fate of my parents' business without ever stepping back into that office as an employee. I spent the night pacing, thinking about what it would mean. My parents had thrown me away. My brother, who lacked the dedication and vision I once had, was struggling to keep the business afloat. The thought of letting them fail was bittersweet, but the alternative, rescuing them, felt like it would erase the hurt, the injustice, the years they had ignored my contributions. Could I forgive them? Could I risk saving them when the betrayal still burned? Meanwhile, inside the family, tensions were escalating. My parents, sensing the cracks, were scrambling to stabilize things. Arguments with my brother became frequent and heated. Employees whispered about mismanagement and confusion at every level. For the first time, I felt the power of observation from a distance. I was no longer just a participant. I was a strategist watching a flawed machine falter without its key engineer. Over the next few days, I met with the competitor discreetly. We discussed strategies, potential acquisitions, and how my knowledge could provide them with an edge. They weren't offering me a favor, they were offering me influence, leverage, and, in a way, control over the business that had cast me aside. The realization made me feel a strange mix of triumph and guilt. I also started receiving indirect messages from former employees. Some were desperate, reaching out for guidance. Others were cautious, warning me not to burn bridges with my parents. But the more I listened, the more I realized something important. My parents' business wasn't just struggling because of external factors. It was struggling because the foundation I had built, the vision I had nurtured, and the discipline I had maintained were no longer there. The decision loomed larger each day. I could step in, save the company, and be the daughter who forgave and repaired. Or I could let it fall, let my knowledge, connections, and timing work for the competitor, and claim my own place in the industry. Revenge or justice was at my fingertips, and I had never felt more alive. By the time Part 5 begins, the cracks in my parents' business were no longer subtle, they were glaring. Revenue reports leaked to me through former employees painted a grim picture. Deals were falling through, deadlines were being missed, and the clients I had nurtured for years were growing frustrated. The company that had once been a symbol of family pride was now teetering on the edge. My brother, who had never been tested like this, was struggling to maintain even the appearance of competence. He made decisions impulsively, ignored critical advice, and, in some cases, doubled down on mistakes that could have been prevented. My parents, for their part, were stressed, defensive, and increasingly at odds with each other. They had never handled a crisis of this magnitude, and their pride made it impossible to ask for help. One evening, I received a call from a senior manager I had mentored, someone I trusted implicitly. "Kat, I don't know how much longer we can hold things together," they admitted. "Your parents don't listen, and your brother, he's making it worse." Hearing it confirmed what I had feared. The business was beyond a simple fix without me. And yet I was still torn. I wanted to intervene, to save the people I loved, but the betrayal still loomed over every thought. I had been discarded, replaced, and dismissed, and the thought of stepping back into that office felt both dangerous and humiliating. At the same time, I began weighing my options with the competitor. They were patient, offering guidance and strategies in case I chose to join them fully. The idea of letting my parents' company collapse while I took the reins elsewhere grew more appealing. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice, strategy, and, frankly, survival. Meanwhile, family tensions reached a boiling point. My brother confronted me over a text message, frustrated and defensive. "I don't need your help, Kat. We've got this," he wrote. I could almost hear him yelling, even through the words on the screen. I didn't respond. How could I explain to him that years of neglect and mismanagement were finally catching up with him? That weekend, I visited my parents under the guise of checking in. The house was tense. Their anxiety was palpable. My father avoided my gaze, my mother was distracted, and my brother was smug, in a way that made my stomach turn. It was obvious they were trying to project confidence, but the cracks showed in every conversation, every decision, every glance. And in that moment, I realized something critical. I held the power. Not just the power to intervene, but the power to decide their fate entirely. Every call I took from former employees, every report I read, every strategic insight I had, it all gave me leverage. I could save them or I could let them fail. And the decision wasn't just about business anymore. It was about family, loyalty, justice, and my own sense of self-worth. That night, I lay awake thinking about the long path that had brought me here. Years of sacrifice, betrayal, and heartache, leading to a moment where I could change everything. And I knew, deep down, the next step I took would define not just the company, but the family I had loved and the person I had become. By now, I was standing at a crossroads I never could have imagined a few years ago. My parents' business, once thriving under my hands, was struggling to survive. My brother, still green and reckless, was floundering under pressure. And my parents' pride made it impossible for them to admit they needed help. And I held the knowledge, the experience, and the power to intervene, or to let the inevitable unfold. The competitor reached out again, more deliberately this time. "Kat, we can work together," the executive said. "With your insight, we could acquire the business and integrate it seamlessly. Your parents may not realize it yet, but it's a perfect opportunity for you to take control in a way they never allowed." I felt the pull of temptation. The idea of having control, of reclaiming the legacy I had built, but this time on my own terms, was intoxicating. I could join them, watch as the business I had nurtured either fell into capable hands or strategically crumble, and still emerge as the victor. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about finally being valued for the skills I had honed for years. Yet guilt nagged at me. Could I really let my parents fail? They were my parents, after all. The people who had shaped me, even if they had betrayed me. The thought of watching them suffer and knowing I could prevent it pressed heavily on my chest. But then I remembered the years of betrayal. The dismissal, the favoritism toward my brother, the lack of acknowledgement for my hard work. Could I truly forgive that so easily? I began analyzing the situation like a chessboard. Every employee, every client, every flaw in management became a piece to be considered. My parents' pride made them predictable. My brother's impulsiveness created weak points I could exploit or mitigate. And the competitor was patient, ready to act if I chose the strategic path. Over the next few weeks, I oscillated between two plans. One involved stepping in discreetly, offering guidance, stabilizing key clients, and secretly preparing the company for acquisition by the competitor. The other involved genuinely trying to save the business, mentoring my brother, and attempting to repair the fractured family trust. Both paths were fraught with risks and moral dilemmas. Then came a turning point. One of the key clients I had personally managed called me, desperation in their voice. "Kat, if you don't step in, we're gone. We've trusted the company because of you, not them." The weight of that call hit me hard. I wasn't just choosing the fate of a business. I was choosing the fate of people who had relied on me. And yet, the fire of betrayal, the thrill of strategic power, and the promise of finally reclaiming my worth tugged me in the opposite direction. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the city skyline, heart pounding. I realized the truth. I wasn't just deciding the future of the company. I was deciding the future of my family and the future of myself. The next move would define everything. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of what I had the power to do. I made my decision, though not out loud, not yet. From the shadows, I began to maneuver. I stayed in touch with the competitor, feeding them insights subtly, providing enough information to make strategic moves without making my intentions obvious. Every piece of knowledge I shared was calculated, a test to see how far I could influence the situation without tipping my hand. Meanwhile, I reached out to a few loyal employees under the guise of casual check-ins. "How's everything holding up?" I asked, carefully listening for any signs of deeper trouble. Their answers painted a picture of chaos. Mismanaged schedules, unhappy clients, and a leadership team completely unprepared to handle even routine challenges. I felt a pang of sorrow. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. People's livelihoods were at stake. But the betrayal I had endured still burned inside me. Then came a call from my brother. He was panicked, his voice shaking. "Kat, I don't know what to do. Everything's falling apart." I kept my tone calm. "Have you tried X? Or Y?" I offered advice, careful not to give away the full picture of how easily I could fix everything. I wanted him to struggle, just enough to see the consequences of his inaction, but not enough to completely collapse the company before the competitor was ready. My parents, oblivious to the full scale of the decline, were still projecting confidence. I could hear it in their strained calls with clients, see it in their increasingly desperate decisions. Pride was blinding them to reality, and I realized that if I stepped in now, I would be seen as the hero savior of the family empire. But that meant forgiving the past, swallowing the betrayal, and becoming the person I had vowed never to be again. The competitor reached out again, more firmly this time. "We can move soon," they said. "If you want, we can secure a deal. It's your call, Kat. You know their weaknesses, and you know how to stabilize things if you choose. Or we can wait and let the cracks widen." That phrase, "let the cracks widen," lingered in my mind. It was tempting, too tempting. For years, I had been powerless, ignored, and dismissed. Now I had control. I could decide whether to intervene or to watch the empire crumble under mismanagement. And the thought of reclaiming my power, not just as a consultant but as a force in the industry, made the moral dilemma incredibly complex. I spent nights planning my moves, calculating every risk. Each decision had weight, each conversation could tip the balance. I was no longer just a former employee. I was the strategist, the one with the insight, the one who knew the inner workings better than anyone. And soon, the first tangible consequences of my choice would begin to ripple through the business and the family. That night, as I stared at my reflection in the darkened window, I realized something crucial. I wasn't just choosing between saving or letting fail. I was choosing between the person I had been, loyal and forgiving, and the person I had become, calculating and powerful. And there was no turning back. The first real consequences of my decisions began to surface faster than I had anticipated. Within weeks, the cracks I had been watching from a distance widened into chasms. Key clients started leaving, citing mismanagement and missed deadlines. Some of the employees I had trusted were forced to make impossible choices, and the morale that had once kept the company afloat was shattered. My brother was overwhelmed. I could hear it in his frantic emails and phone calls. He was scrambling, trying to maintain appearances, but every move he made seemed to accelerate the decline. My parents, meanwhile, were caught in a fog of denial and fear. They refused to see the depth of the crisis, clinging stubbornly to the belief that it was just a rough patch that would pass. Pride, it seemed, was more dangerous than incompetence. Meanwhile, I continued my careful orchestration with the competitor. I provided guidance subtly, never revealing that I was now fully aligned with them. Every strategic insight, every weak point I highlighted was a calculated move to ensure that if the company fell, it wouldn't collapse chaotically. It would fall into the hands of those who could handle it and, crucially, people I trusted. The first domino fell when one of the largest clients, one I had personally nurtured years ago, decided to move their business elsewhere. Their reasoning was simple. They trusted the leadership that had built the company, not the leadership that remained. Their departure sent shockwaves through the office, fueling panic and paranoia. My parents began pointing fingers at each other, while my brother lashed out at employees, creating even more internal strife. I watched all of this unfold with a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. The competitor was making moves quietly in the background, preparing to swoop in, and I was the one guiding them from the shadows. It was exhilarating, almost addictive, to realize how much influence I still had over the company I had been cast out from. And yet, the family toll was undeniable. My mother began crying over the phone, pleading for advice. My father called late one night, his voice shaky, asking what they should do next. My brother, humiliated and desperate, finally reached out to me directly, voice breaking. "Kat, please, I need you. Just tell me what to do." That's when it hit me. I had the power to save them entirely. With a few calls, a few strategic moves, I could stabilize everything, restore confidence, and perhaps even repair the family bonds. But doing so would erase the lesson they were being forced to learn, the consequences of their decisions, their pride, their favoritism, and the years of betrayal I had endured. I sat alone, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. For the first time, I understood the gravity of my choices. I wasn't just maneuvering a business. I was shaping the lives of the people I loved, the family that had betrayed me, and the very legacy I had helped create. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that the final move would define me far more than it would define them. The moment of truth arrived sooner than I expected. After weeks of watching the collapse unfold, the cracks were no longer small. They were gaping, impossible to ignore. Clients were leaving in droves, employees were burning out, and my brother's reckless decisions were accelerating the decline. My parents were exhausted, confused, and defensive, unable to admit they needed help. The competitor called again, more insistently this time. "Kat, this is it. If you want, we can finalize the acquisition. Your insight can make it seamless. Or you can step back and let things continue as they are." I sat in silence, staring at the papers in front of me. Financial reports, emails from panicked employees, and notes from the competitor. Every detail reminded me of the years I had sacrificed, the loyalty I had shown, and the betrayal I had endured. And I realized something undeniable. I had the power not just to save or let fail, but to decide how the story of my parents' business would end. For a moment, I imagined stepping in, repairing everything, being the savior. My parents would praise me, my brother might learn something, and the family would be whole again, or so it seemed. But I remembered the betrayal, the dismissal, the favoritism toward my brother, and the years of being undervalued. Could I forgive all that so easily? Could I undo the lesson they were being forced to learn? I made my choice. I would not save them. I would let the competitor with whom I was aligned acquire the business. But I would do it strategically, carefully, ensuring that the collapse wouldn't be chaotic but inevitable, controlled, and ultimately irreversible. I wasn't acting out of pure spite. I was asserting the power I had been denied for years, reclaiming my worth, and taking control of a situation that had once left me powerless. The final steps were methodical. I coordinated with the competitor, providing key insights into client priorities, employee weaknesses, and operational vulnerabilities. I guided them just enough to make the acquisition smooth while keeping my identity and intentions carefully hidden. Each move was deliberate, calculated, and precise. Meanwhile, my parents and brother were scrambling, still unaware of the forces working behind the scenes. They reached out to me repeatedly, pleading for advice, begging for help, but I remained silent. Every call, every message, every desperate attempt only reinforced the reality of my decision. I was no longer at their mercy, they were at mine. When the deal was finalized, the competitor smoothly took control. The transition was clean, but the impact was devastating for my family. My parents were stunned, my brother humiliated, and the employees faced a new management structure that was stronger, more disciplined, and far less forgiving. And I had emerged not just as a strategist and a consultant, but as someone who had reclaimed control over a life that had once been dictated by betrayal. Sitting in my apartment that night, I felt a strange mix of triumph and emptiness. I had won in a way I had never imagined, but the cost, the broken family, the fractured relationships, was heavy. Yet deep down, I knew that I had finally reclaimed my power, my worth, and my place in the world. And for the first time in years, I felt truly in control. The dust settled, and life moved forward. But nothing would ever be the same. The competitor had fully absorbed my parents' business, streamlining operations, stabilizing clients, and turning the failing company into a thriving division under their control. From the outside, It looked seamless. From the inside, the shockwaves were profound. My parents were devastated. Pride, stubbornness, and their refusal to acknowledge the warning signs had left them powerless. My father avoided my calls, my mother's voice was quiet when we spoke, and my brother, he didn't reach out at all. The sibling I had once tried to guide had been humbled in a way I knew would leave lasting scars. For a brief moment, I felt a twinge of guilt, a pang of sorrow for the family I had lost. But the betrayal of years past, the dismissal, the favoritism, the lack of appreciation, still lingered like a shadow I could never ignore. Meanwhile, I had risen. The competitor recognized my value, my strategic mind, and my intimate knowledge of the industry. I was no longer the overlooked daughter. I was a leader, a key player, and someone whose decisions shaped the company's future. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very business that had discarded me now owed its survival to my knowledge, but I was no longer involved directly. I had turned my pain into power, my betrayal into leverage. The aftermath was complicated. Former employees who had reached out to me quietly acknowledged my role in the transition, even if they couldn't say it openly. Some were bitter, some relieved, but all recognized that I had acted decisively. The competitor respected my discretion and strategic mind, ensuring my career trajectory skyrocketed. I often thought about whether I had done the right thing. Could I have forgiven my parents, intervened, and saved the business? Perhaps. But I realized that in doing so, I would have risked sacrificing myself again. The same loyalty and dedication that had been exploited years ago. I couldn't erase the past, and I couldn't pretend the betrayal hadn't shaped me. In the quiet moments, I reflected on what power really meant. It wasn't about revenge, though it had been satisfying. It wasn't about wealth, though the professional success was undeniable. It was about agency, the ability to make choices based on my values, knowledge, and experience. For the first time, I truly had control over my destiny. And so, the family I once thought I was saving had changed irreversibly. My relationship with them was fractured, perhaps beyond repair, but I no longer felt powerless. I had turned years of sacrifice and heartbreak into a story of resilience, strategy, and, ultimately, self-preservation. When I look back, I don't see myself as cruel or heartless. I see someone who learned to navigate betrayal, to assert worth, and to reclaim control over a life that had once been dictated by others. And in that reflection, I finally understand. Sometimes, letting go isn't giving up. It's taking the power you were always meant to wield.